Greetings. In this video, you will hear the most interesting and scary 5 horror stories. If you like these stories, you can subscribe so you don't lose my channel. Enjoy watching. The Infernal Pact. The night the demon came, Lucas Redding was already broken. His wife had left him, his job was gone, and his father, his only family, had just died. That was why, in a whiskey-fueled haze, he found himself sitting in the attic of his decaying childhood home, flipping through the pages of a book bound in something that felt too much like human skin. The book had belonged to his father, a man obsessed with the occult. Lucas had spent years ridiculing him, dismissing his endless warnings about the horrors lurking just beyond the veil of reality. But tonight, as the storm outside howled and the power flickered, he was desperate. The book's pages whispered to him, "We can give you what you have lost." He read aloud. The words felt like broken glass in his throat, ancient syllables that no human tongue was meant to pronounce. The air grew thick, heavy, suffocating. The candlelight twisted unnaturally, shadows writhing against the walls like living things. And then, silence. A figure emerged from the darkness. Not stepped forward, not approached. Just was suddenly there, as though it had been in the room all along, waiting to be seen. It was tall, impossibly so, its form shifting, flickering between something vaguely human and something that was decidedly not. Its face, if it could be called that, was an absence, a void where features should be, save for 2 hollow eyes that dripped something thick and black onto the wooden floor. "You called," it rasped, voice like splintering bone. Lucas couldn't breathe. His body was paralyzed, his mind screaming at him to wake up, run, anything. But it wasn't a dream. "You seek power. You seek to reclaim what was taken. I offer you more." Lucas swallowed, his throat dry as ash. What do you want?" The thing grinned. "A home." And then it was inside him. Not in the way of stories, not a mere voice in his head or a shadow lurking behind his eyes. It became him. His veins burned, his flesh crawled, his bones shifted. His screams filled the attic as his own hands, tore at his skin, carving runes into his flesh that glowed with sickly, pulsing light. By the time he stumbled to the mirror, he was already something else. His eyes, once brown, were now abyssal pits, swirling with something ancient and hungry. His reflection didn't move when he did. It watched, and then it smiled. Over the next few weeks, Lucas flourished. His body was stronger, his mind sharper. He could hear people's thoughts, feel their fear. He got his job back. His ex-wife started calling again, drawn to him in a way that wasn't natural. Money came easily. Everything he had lost returned. But the hunger, it never left. At first, it was a whisper, a quiet, gnawing need for something he couldn't name. Then, one night, as he sat across from his ex-wife at dinner, he saw it, her soul. It pulsed beneath her skin, golden and fragile. And he knew, if he wanted, he could reach out, pull it from her like a thread, unravel her existence and take it for himself. He resisted. For days, he fought the hunger, until the night he woke up, hands drenched in blood, his bedroom filled with the mangled, lifeless bodies of strangers he didn't even remember inviting in. The thing inside him purred in satisfaction. You cannot fight what you are. Lucas stared at the carnage, at the horror he had become. He tried to scream, but the voice that came out wasn't his. It was deeper, older, and filled with something that had waited far too long to be free. And somewhere, deep inside, Lucas realized he was already gone. The Hollow Man. Father Michael Carter had spent his life waging war against the darkness. As a priest and exorcist, he had seen things that would break lesser men. Bodies contorted in impossible ways, voices speaking in languages they had never learned, eyes that held something far older than the human soul. But nothing had prepared him for James Holloway. James was different. When Michael was first called to the Holloway house, he expected the usual signs: violent outbursts, objects moving on their own, a voice that wasn't James speaking from his lips. But what he found was far worse. James sat in the middle of his bedroom, staring at the wall, not blinking, not moving. His mother, a woman aged far beyond her years by terror, whispered to Michael. He stopped talking 3 weeks ago. Then, he stopped blinking. Then he stopped sleeping. Michael studied the boy, if he was still a boy. His skin was too pale, his lips dry and cracked, his chest rising and falling with slow, mechanical precision. His eyes, God, his eyes, were wide, black pits, as if something had reached inside and scooped out whatever had once lived there. James, Michael said softly. The boy's mouth moved, not to speak, but to smile. A slow, deliberate, wrong smile that stretched far too wide, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. He's not there anymore, the mother whispered, clutching Michael's arm so tightly her nails dug into his skin. Michael swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain calm. He stepped closer, raising his Bible. In the name of the Lord, I command whatever is inside you to reveal itself. James didn't react. He just kept smiling. Michael opened his vial of holy water and flicked a few drops onto the boy's forehead. The reaction was instant. James snapped his head toward him, the sound of his neck twisting so violently that Michael expected the boy to collapse, dead. But James just grinned wider, his pupils dilating until there was nothing but black. And then he spoke. You think your little tricks will work on me, priest? The voice wasn't human. It was layered, many voices speaking at once, male and female, child and elder, whispering and screaming all at once. Michael steeled himself. I cast you out, unclean spirit, in the name of... James laughed. The sound wasn't right. It didn't stop when it should have. It kept going, building, growing, until the walls shook, until the air felt heavy, until Michael could feel it inside his head. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. James leaned forward, his body moving in a way that was too fluid, too boneless. His nose was almost touching Michael's. His breath smelled of rot, of something ancient. You cannot cast out what has already won. The lights flickered, the room tilted, and Michael saw it. For just a moment, he saw what was really sitting in front of him. It wore James's body like a puppet, but inside, it was something else, something vast and endless, something with too many mouths and too many hands, something that had been watching from the darkness long before James had ever been born. And it was hungry. Michael stumbled back, clutching his cross. God will. There is no God here, it whispered. The candles around the room snuffed out, and James blinked for the first time in weeks. When his eyes opened again, Michael saw nothing, just an empty shell, a husk. James Holloway was gone, and in his place sat something else, something that had no name. Whispers in the dark. It started with a voice. At first, Claire Morgan thought she was just hearing things. A whisper in the dark when she was on the edge of sleep, a murmur behind her as she washed dishes, the faintest echo of her name in an empty room. Nothing, just her imagination. Then the voice started speaking in her own thoughts. Claire, don't turn around. She turned anyway. Nothing. He's watching you. She spun, heart pounding, but the apartment was empty. By the third week, she could no longer tell which thoughts were hers and which belonged to the other. It never screamed, never threatened, just whispered, soft, patient, knowing. Then came the shadow. One night, Claire woke to the feeling of something watching her. Not the vague, paranoid feeling of being observed. This was different, tangible, wrong. She lay still, barely breathing, listening. The voice whispered, if you open your eyes, you will see it. She squeezed them shut tighter. It's in the corner of the room. It's waiting. Claire felt the air shift. A presence. Heavy. Watching. Grinning. It wants you to know that it's patient. That it can wait forever. She pulled the covers over her head, shaking. For the next few nights, she refused to sleep in darkness. Every light in her apartment burned. Every lamp, every bulb, every candle. But it didn't matter, because the voice no longer needed the dark. It spoke to her in broad daylight, whispering from behind her as she walked down crowded streets, muttering just beneath the voices of the people she spoke to. And worse, she began to see it. Not fully. Not yet. Just a glimpse. A reflection in the subway window. A tall, thin figure standing at the far end of the train car, head tilted at an unnatural angle, its grin too wide. A shadow on the ceiling of her apartment, elongated, shifting, watching. It never moved when she looked directly at it. But every time she turned away, it got closer. By the time she called her mother in a panic, she hadn't slept in 4 days. "I need help," she whispered. "Mom, I think I'm losing my mind." Her mother's voice on the other end of the line was wrong. Slow, distant. "Sweetheart." Claire froze. "Sweetheart, it's already inside." The call cut off. Silence. Then, behind her, a breath. Warm. "Close." And the voice whispered. Not in her mind this time, but right next to her ear. "Turn around." She did, and she saw it. For the first time. For the last time. The thing in the mirror. Ethan Graves never believed in ghosts, demons, or anything beyond what he could see with his own 2 eyes. He was a man of reason, of logic. That's why, when the mirror in his bathroom started lying to him, he didn't panic. Not at first. It began subtly. A delay in his reflections movement. A blink that happened half a second too late. A shift in posture that wasn't his own. Tricks of the mind. Nothing more. Then, one night, it smiled. Ethan hadn't been smiling. He froze, toothbrush halfway to his mouth. His reflection, his own face, grinned at him, wide and sharp. He took a slow step back. His reflection didn't. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt something he couldn't explain. Something wrong. The grin widened. Then his reflection raised a hand. Ethan's hands stayed at his sides. His reflection waved. He stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the tile. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. "This isn't real. This isn't real." The lights flickered, and the reflection took a step forward. Not Ethan. The reflection. Ethan bolted. For the next few days, he avoided the mirror entirely. He showered without looking, brushed his teeth with his eyes averted. The air in his apartment felt heavier, thicker. Wrong. But no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, he could feel it. Watching. Waiting. On the 5th night, he woke up to the sound of shattering glass. Heart hammering, he grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the bathroom. The door was ajar, the air inside too cold. The mirror lay in jagged shards across the floor. He exhaled, relief washing over him. Maybe it's over. Then he noticed something. The shards of glass. They weren't reflecting his bathroom. They were reflecting something else. A dark, empty space. No walls. No ceiling. Just blackness stretching infinitely. And in that blackness, something moved. A shape. A figure. No. A dozen figures. Tall. Twisted. Smiling. They stood just beyond the glass, watching him. One of them stepped forward and whispered in his own voice. "The door is open now." The lights flickered out, and Ethan screamed. The passenger. The first time Daniel heard the voice, he was driving home from work. It was late. The highway was nearly empty, just miles of open road stretching into the dark. The radio played softly, the low hum of static mixing with the sound of the tires against the asphalt. Then, from the back seat, a whisper. "You should let me drive." Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened. His heart slammed against his ribs. He didn't turn around. Because he was alone. He flicked his eyes to the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the empty back seat. "I'm just tired," he muttered to himself. But as the exit sign for his neighborhood came into view, something moved in the mirror. A shape. A person sitting in the back seat. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His hands turned ice cold on the wheel. His pulse thundered in his ears. The figure was watching him, not breathing, not blinking, just grinning. Then, in a slow, measured voice, it whispered, "Don't crash." Daniel jerked the wheel. The tires screeched. The car swerved. He barely managed to regain control before pulling over to the side of the road, his body shaking violently. He turned around. Empty. The back seat was empty. For the next few days, he convinced himself it had been a hallucination. Stress. Lack of sleep. Nothing more. Until it came back. Every time he drove at night, he felt it. The presence. The weight of unseen eyes crawling over his skin. Then the whispers started again. "You're not alone. Let me drive. You don't deserve to be in control." Then, one night, he felt breath on his neck, and the hands, cold, skeletal hands, gripping the wheel with him. The car swerved violently, nearly slamming into a guardrail. Daniel screamed, wrenching the wheel back, heart hammering out of his chest. And in the mirror, it was there, a figure of pure darkness, grinning too wide, its hollow eyes locked onto his. It leaned forward, its voice slithering through the air. "You can't fight me forever." That was the night Daniel stopped driving. But it didn't matter, because now the whispers followed him home. And the next time he looked in the mirror, it wasn't just behind him, it was inside him,